Greetings, folks. Philip Bateman with the Smarter Impact Show. It's my great pleasure to have Alan Schwartz AM here with us as we bring you this interview series with the support of Pro Bono Australia. Bit of an intro to Alan. He's a renowned Australian business leader, graduated probably quite a while ago now from Monash University with degrees in economics and law. And during your first year at Monash, I believe you co-authored a best-selling economics textbook, The Australian Economy.
Yes.
Past chair of Philanthropy Australia, recipient of the Order of Australia Medal in 2007, 10 years later moving on to set up the Universal Commons Project with the goal of reforming political and economic institutions so that profit and value are aligned and business and capitalism can serve the common good. And I believe you've got quite a legacy of Australian business endeavours. And this year, you've published articles including Why Milton Friedman Was Right and Wrong in the Australian Financial Review, Impact Investing Won't Save Capitalism in the Harvard Business Review, Time for the Nationals to Get on Board or Get Out of the Way in the Sydney Morning Herald, and Do Not Approach Doing Nothing as a Recipe to Disaster in the Australian. It feels like there's quite the juncture between business as usual and needing rapid shifts here. And I know we discussed this in yourself as the tension between the sensible Alan and the radical Alan to your peers. I was curious, how is living in the middle of that tension for you?
Well, I suppose it goes back a long way. Really, the conscientious middle child of Holocaust survivors, and sort of went about my way of building a business and creating stability in my life. And about 25 years ago, got to a point where I thought there's got to be more, and I had a bit of a discomfort about where I was and the nature of capitalism, and I got involved in community work. And then I started living in two worlds, really, the world of capitalism, if you like, and the world of almost being a social activist. And they were very difficult worlds to reconcile, and I watched. And on one hand, I believed that the businesses that I'd built had created value for the world and I was entitled to the profit that I made. On the other hand, I could see that there was a lot of injustice and suffering in the world, and it seemed to me that capitalism might have some role in it. So this was a paradox for me that I started exploring, probably subliminally, until the Harvard Club asked me to give an opening address at one of their events. And I sort of lashed out as a sort of cantankerous older man with all my frustrations about the way the economy worked. And that really triggered a much more intense inquiry into the nature of capitalism and how we might change it so that we get the best of it without the worst.
And you and I met recently during your SOCAP presentation. I don't actually remember what SOCAP stands for. It's like social capital.
Yeah.
It's big, broad.
Something. Yeah, it's really investors and capital providers who are interested in attaching some social good or some social filter or dimension to their investment, not just purely the pursuit of profit.
Yeah. To me, as a big tent is what the Americans refer to it as. The big tent umbrella everybody can get together under and have a go.
Yeah.
And during your presentation, you talked to the necessity of a carbon price to see the environmental change necessary to arguably sustain life on the planet. I'll put that image up as an overlay so people can see it whilst we talk. But could you talk to that for me?
Yeah, basically I spent a lot of time thinking about how do you communicate this idea that and the question of impact investment, which really puzzled me, because on one hand I thought impact investors and the concept of impact investing is a fantastic one, because it reflects there are people who actually care about the effect of what they do in business on the community. But on the other hand, I couldn't reconcile that with Adam Smith's original ideas and my observations that you could do social good while you made profit at the same time. The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker all produce things of value to the community, not out of the goodness of their heart, but because it's profitable to them. But that doesn't mean that they're not producing good outcomes for society as well. And that was the magic, if you like, of capitalism. So I wondered, why do we need impact investment? Why don't we just have ordinary investment? For example, there are plenty of things that you can do as an investor to reduce carbon emissions. You can invest in solar and produce perfectly reasonable returns. And that's what impact investors do. They focus their capital on areas where, it's sort of like I have a choice between investing in A and make 10%, and B and make 10%, but B actually produces something that I perceive to be of better social or environmental value, so I'll do B. That's the overlay. But then sometimes impact investment movement suggests that there's in fact no trade-off between profit and doing social good or environmental good, and I disagree with that fundamentally. And the reason I wrote that piece in the Harvard Business Review is to express that disagreement. So if you look at reducing carbon in the economy, reducing carbon in a business, there are a bunch of things that you can do that what we call below the line. In other words, it's possible to replace light globes. It's possible to invest in some solar projects or in some limited wind projects and make possibly and probably a reasonable and normal return. But if you think about the amount of things that need to be done to reach net zero by 2050 and 2030, that only represents about 5% of the stuff that needs to be done. So if there's no price on carbon, it's only a very limited amount of things that impact investors can do in the reduction of carbon emissions. Beyond that, the only way an investor can make further investments in certain types of other renewables or biomass or even in some cases nuclear and other types of wind and carbon sequestration, et cetera, is if there's a tax, so that there is a real cost associated with carbon, which means that when I produce something that reduces carbon, somebody else can buy that from me and reduce the tax that they need to pay, so that the market actually kicks in and I'm able to make those investments profitably. And unless that happens, it's not going to be possible for business unless business is philanthropic. In other words, if you're asking business to go out and do something that actually costs them money, that actually produces losses, you're actually asking business to be philanthropic. By philanthropic, I mean private cost and public good. That's what a philanthropist does. That's not what we expect from business. What we expect from business is what we call mutualistic capitalism, which is private benefit and public benefit. Now, they're the opportunities that I call below the line. Above the line, I can only produce carbon reduction above the line if there's a carbon tax or there's a cap and trade system whereby carbon emissions are limited in the economy, so companies that emit carbon have to buy the carbon that they use, and that creates for me the demand to enable me to invest in a more marginal solar project or in a biomass project or other sorts of projects that today are not economic. And that has led me to the conclusion that reforming capitalism is a lot more political than I understood. And I've written another piece that's going to be published in the Griffith Review, which is called something like My Late Political Onset, My Late Onset Political Awakening, which is my realization that to change capitalism is not just a matter of implementing technical things like new markets or thinking about things differently, but actually persuading government to change the rules of the game so that it becomes profitable for me to do a biomass project that was previously not profitable. Now, that in some places is regarded as unnecessary government interference, but I think that's ludicrous because the governments have always interfered in modern societies through taxation, education, roads. They create, if you like, the rule box in which business can operate. This is also why I said Milton Friedman was right and wrong, because Milton Friedman was right when he said it's not the role of business to be philanthropists, and I couldn't agree more. It's just not reasonable. You can't expect it. Philanthropy is a voluntary act, and that's a very small proportion of the community that actually acts philanthropically. The majority of people look for opportunities where they can personally get a benefit while they contribute to society. That's how our society works. So he was right in saying that philanthropists, that you can't expect business to be philanthropists. But he was also right when he said that business must pursue profits within the rules of the game. In other words, and so he's still right. Where he was wrong was he actually argued against government rules. He argued against too much government interference. He said the government should stay out of the way. They should enforce the law. They should enforce property rights. They should ensure security for the country and get out of the way. but that is where he's wrong, because governments have to actually create the framework for the way capitalism works, and capitalism should accept that. So my argument about a good capitalist is not one that forgoes profit for community good, because that's not realistic. That's a philanthropist. A good capitalist is one that accepts the fact that we need a lot of rules from government. Don't call them red tape, call them important rules. And within that framework and those constraints, which are designed to ensure that I can only make a profit when I do something that's socially useful. For example, banning asbestos is what? Are we thinking that's red tape? That's the government saying, you know what, if you buy a building, you better be sure there's not asbestos in it, because you're going to have to clean it out in a very special way, which means that I, as a profit seeker, would avoid that building, which reduces its price, which then actually plays into the way the market works. People are more careful about the materials they use. So that was a journey that took me 3 years. And the reason I'm happy to talk to you, Philip, is because the conclusion I came to is I'm not really sure what's next for me in terms of what do you do about it. And I've decided that at least for the next few months, while I think about what I might do next, I'll take every opportunity that I can to share with other people like me, people who are business people, people who are, if you like, good people who care about the world, feel uncomfortable about the economy, aren't quite sure about why, which is where I was, to help them on that journey. And this is why I'm writing, and this is why I'm taking interviews, because I feel that what took me 3 years, enormous amount of reading and thinking and talking to people, you could accelerate by understanding what the blockages were in my mind about why creating change is deeply political.
And if you were to list those blockages in a 1, 2, 3, what would you say?
Yeah, I could. The blockages are, for me, were two things. Firstly, it's sort of obvious that everything is political for anyone who's an educated and thoughtful person. And if you would have asked me that question, I would have agreed with you. I would have said, yeah, everything's political, and therefore the way the economy works must be political. I resisted that. And the reason I resisted it was because being curious is one thing. I'm very curious. Being flexible is another thing. I'm very flexible. But this required me to change my entire worldview, because my worldview was whoever makes a profit deserves it, right? And so therefore the system's not rigged. No one's got any particular advantage. Those who work hard and produce value earn and deserve the profit that they make. And I really believed that. I couldn't reconcile it with the other bad things I was seeing, but I hadn't actually resolved it. So for me, that was still a firm stake in the ground. Now, if you come to the view that the way the economy works is deeply political, and therefore it's not necessarily just, because politics is whatever it is.
Yeah.
So therefore I'd have to change my entire worldview about the merit of people who've created value and wealth through capitalism, because perhaps the rules are such that you've been able to make the money that you've made while not advancing social or environmental good. So that was number one. And that is very troubling, to do that. It's a very difficult thing to do. The second is the fact that from a very early age, I always regarded politics as being nasty and something I wasn't the slightest bit interested in. I was going to do useful and practical things. I was going to build businesses. I was going to, create a family, and I was going to do things I could control that would produce a good outcome, that I could actually see the outcome of. And I saw politics as over there and I'm not interested, and that's for them. And it's an ugly business and I'm not interested. If you realise that the way the economy works is deeply political, and if you're concerned about it, you're forced to re-examine why you haven't been political yourself. And therefore, firstly, you don't want to believe that it's deeply political and therefore the virtue that you thought you had is not necessarily there. And secondly, if it's deeply political and you want to change it, well, you have to get political, which is something I never wanted to do. So they're deep sort of psychological blockages that prevented my ability to logically work my way through. I kept on resisting these conclusions as I read through the notes that I wrote over 3 years and the things that I read. I kept on resisting these conclusions and kept on going on detours to avoid that fundamental conclusion. So that's the I'd like to be able to help business people, impact investors, philanthropists who were like me, and some are not. Some people never fell into that trap of believing that the economy was this objective machine that rewarded those that created value and didn't reward those who didn't create value. Maybe there's a lot of people, but I think there's a lot of people like me who are concerned about the way the world works, but actually believe that the economy is an objective machine that produces perfectly fairly outcomes to people who create value.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily true.
Yeah. That's the essence of, or the definition of free market capitalism from a few decades ago.
That's
traditionally.
Right.
And I mean, I think it's arguable to say that it does create value for those who create value and not for those who don't, though
that's profit and not value.
But it's not a fair system. It's fundamentally mechanized to support entrenched people who have basically legislated or lobbied for the system to be structured in a certain way.
Exactly.
I mean, if you can't build an offshore gas facility, if you don't get 20 years of tax-free profits afterwards, which means it's not a profit. It's not profitable.
Well, I agree with that. And if you think about the mining industry's battle against the mining tax, they spent $25 million to save billions of dollars in tax.
Yeah.
And so what I was saying before was that a good company is one that accepts the rules, doesn't stand in the way of the rules, doesn't undermine the rule, changes in the rules that are for the public good. You can't be critical of that person. So if the rules aren't quite right, you still have to be pretty tolerant of a business person, even though because that business person is trapped in the system like everybody else.
Yeah.
So don't criticize a good, honest business person who says, I understand the role of government, I pay my taxes, I treat my suppliers fairly, I worry about the environment, but I don't spend $2 million making sure my supply chain is free of slave labour, because that would send me broke. I can't afford to do that until the government passes a law and the systems are created whereby I can know that, and my competitors need to do that. Don't expect me to do that, because that's not my job. That's the job of society through the government. The businesses that I've got a problem with are the businesses that undermine the rules, that describe government intervention as socialism, that say that environmental regulations are vandalism.
Yeah.
That's where the real problem is the undermining of democracy by capitalism, whereby they try to turn the rules in their own favour.
Yeah, I see it as almost like a furphy on the fact that, red tape, but all the tape that you like is not red.
Correct.
It's blue. It's
That's
gold.
Right.
It's golden tape that allows you to, reap the benefits.
Absolutely.
Or reap the value that you do.
It's very complicated, because we can't get into a mindset either, this is where I sit on both sides, that a tax break for a company who finds offshore gas may not be a bad thing. It might be a bad thing. It may not be a bad thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's just neutral. You can't say that when a company gets a benefit, it's bad. And nor can you say it's always good. Exactly. You've got to look at it on its merits.
A mechanism by which to attain energy security for our country.
Correct.
Because we need power. We have a developing society. That's
maybe all alternatives are worse for society. That the best, just like the government spends money on educating children, well, that's very expensive, but we accept that.
Yeah.
Right? That's a benefit, if you like, to government schools. We sort of accept that. We shouldn't say, a tax break to a gas driller is necessarily bad. We've got to say this tax break is bad because the value created for society is not equal to the profit made by the shareholders. And the reason that tax break was given was because of some political deal that was done.
Yeah.
So it requires a sort of a granular analysis rather than an ideological view that all tax breaks for business are bad, or the ideological view that anything that reduces my profits is red tape.
Yeah.
Right?
As I've been listening, I've been noticing this formulation in my mind of the idea that as a business owner, growing businesses is tremendously hard. to successfully create a business by the numbers that scales tremendously hard. And I'm hearing the need for, basically, if you were giving advice to somebody in their earlier career who's growing one of these businesses, that alongside the challenge of growing their business, there's a need to take on a political awareness and a political savviness and a political, joie de vivre to make change happen in a way that supports their ethical alignment. I mean, I don't know people who are growing businesses who genuinely don't care about their employees and the life their employees are going to have and their families and the place in which they operate.
Yeah.
Seems to me that that's necessary. And the other side to this, as I formulate it, is that market mechanisms like solar power, renewables, things like that, the Australian business community is just driving that. It's not being driven at a political level. Is there any chance that Australian business can freely enter into a cap and trade system or a carbon tax without the government? Because from what I've seen, we don't have a whole lot of people. We don't have an opposition that's in opposition, and the currently elected federal government are.
It's extremely difficult because I'm writing a paper at the moment, which is an article at the moment. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But it starts with Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons. And it describes how, the commoners would share the land. And the theory was that it would be overused because no one owned the land. And so if any of the herdsmen removed their cattle, somebody else would put their cattle on. And everyone had an interest in optimizing what they took out of it privately, but no one owned the land.
Yeah.
So that's called the Tragedy of the Commons because it gets overgrazed, it gets destroyed, and everyone loses. Right? So what the King of England did was he privatised it. He enclosed it and gave it to the lords, probably because he got extra taxes, etc., etc. But that story is a very important story because even nation states today are like the herdsmen in that story. If Australia reduces its carbon emissions, just like if the herdsman removed one of his cattle, somebody else would put a cattle on. That's Scott Morrison's argument. And it's not a stupid argument. He says, yeah, but we can reduce our emissions, but we're only 1% of the world. Someone else will fill that gap for us. And that'll harm our industry and our people. Although I don't like the argument, it's not a stupid argument. It's actually, it's an age-old concept that I can't do a personal sacrifice for a communal good. So therefore they try to create United Nations. And the United Nations tries to get together and produce Paris and Copenhagen and all the rest of it. But that's like the herdsmen all coming together and trying to agree on how to use that land. And maybe the herdsmen can because they're all villagers in England and they can agree that you're on Tuesday and I'm on Thursday and you can't do more than 3 days a week. But you're not going to get 195 countries agreeing because they've all got such incredibly diverse interests. Similarly, companies, how can companies voluntarily reduce their emissions unless there's a carbon tax? Because then they're at a competitive disadvantage. So that's like if a company reduces its carbon emissions at a cost to the company, is exactly like one of the herdsmen removing a cow. Somebody else will just increase their market share because they're going to have a lower cost. So that's the problem. That's when the only answer is a regulatory answer. I'm working on an alternative answer at the moment, which I'm not ready to share only because it sounds a bit silly at this stage. But I think we're going to need a breakthrough in the way we think about those sorts of problems. Who owns the atmosphere? And how should we manage that? And how should corporations actually act? Because they are leading. We've got investors, we've got social activists, we've got the threat of future regulatory change. Right? That's enough. As a business person, I don't need a regulation necessarily to act. If I know there's going to be a regulation, I will start preparing for it. So if you're a business person who believes there will be a carbon tax or there will be a cap and trade, you start withdrawing from business processes and industrial processes that are very carbon intensive because you know there's something that's like any form of strategic planning. You're not doing it because you're being a nice guy. You're not doing it philanthropically, as you shouldn't. You shouldn't in capitalism be required to be philanthropic. You're just being smart. But if what you're doing is undermining the process of introducing a carbon tax so that you don't have to withdraw from those activities, that's when I criticise you. That's when there's a problem. So when the political process gets corrupted, which is exactly what's happened, The majority of Australians want a carbon tax or some sort of cap and trade system. The majority, a significant majority, but the politics doesn't work because there's a number of concentrated pockets in Australia of electorates that will turn the wrong way if they're personally hurt, which is completely understandable as well. If you're a coal miner, you're not going to vote for a party that's going to put you out of a job.
Yeah.
That's perfectly reasonable. We understand that. So we need to compensate those coal miners appropriately. We need to find a process of saying the whole community is going to be better off if we do this. So we're going to compensate you because we're all going to be better off. And I can't help thinking about America and what's happened in the last 30, 40 years. America outsourced all their manufacturing to China, and that was for the net benefit of all Americans because they got cheaper products. But there was a small group of people, 20, 30 million people in Ohio and Michigan and all that, who worked in cars and steel and everything else, who lost their jobs. And America, being the sort of society they are, didn't take them with them. Yeah. Whereas when the Ford factory here in Victoria closed, we all freaked out. The government started working. We had retraining, redevelopment, reallocating. So what they've done, because it was in America, it was called socialism. This is socialism. You can't, those people have to work it out for themselves. Rubbish. A society has to, we're all going to benefit from this. So we're going to look after you. So we're all going to benefit out of reducing carbon emissions. So we'll look after the coal miners. We'll make sure that they've got plenty of income. They get re-education. They get lots and lots of opportunities. They're honoured and respected, not vilified for the sacrifice that they're making. The problem is that this is a global problem. It's okay for Victoria to say we can't have those auto workers out of work because we're a small community. We care. How are we going to come up with a plan where a piece of emission in Afghanistan or in America or China or Australia is identical because it circulates around the world? So everyone's got the motivation to put their cow back on the field when someone removes their cow. Yeah. Right? So someone in Afghanistan is not going to care, or someone in Australia is not going to care because there's an opportunity for them. How do you manage that without a global government? How do you create, because how was the problem of the tragedy of the commons solved? The king said, right, this is not working. You guys out of here. We're going to give this to the Lord. He's going to introduce good technology, modern agricultural methods, and agricultural production went through the roof. The country got richer, but there was some that's led to the convicts in Australia and all the massive social dislocation. Because again, just like with the steelworkers in America, no one gave a shit about those people who lost their jobs. They had to go and work in factories in the city, lost their opportunity to run their cattle on the fields, etc., etc. So it's this constant battle for society working out what works for the whole of society through whatever rules, whatever ruler they've got, it's a king or a government or whatever, and then making sure that the rules that the society sets enables those who are productive to produce as much as possible within those rules, but that those rules also make sure that the society remains coherent and integrated and no one gets left behind. A little bit left behind, maybe. You know, if someone wants to choose a simpler life, they're not going to be as wealthy as someone who works very hard. But you can't create a situation where people are destitute or where people are desperate, which is what's happened in America, which is why we've seen Trumpism. Because everyone says, you know, they're all lunatics. I say, no, they're not lunatics. They were ignored by the mainstream. The people in New York and people in California were doing fabulous. They're getting their flat screen TVs and their computers out of China. It was all fabulous. No one gave us stuff because there was no sense of a communal obligation for all of us. Had they looked after those people, we wouldn't be where we are now.
Yeah, big. I mean, there's a bit of me that wants to stray into the idea of global government, though I think that'd be like a full 2-hour session.
Good luck.
And the implications around that. So
we might just I think that if you look at the history of mankind, we started with families and then tribes and then villages and then cities and then regional princedoms and then countries and then the European Union, which is fraying, but still the trend is very clear. we are going to need some form of global government for the things that we share together.
Yeah.
The atmosphere is one of them.
Yeah.
We have got to find a way for national governments to abdicate enough power to some authority.
Yeah.
It's almost like, how we depoliticize infrastructure. Depoliticize carbon emissions, because that's the only way that we're going to get enough power to create the change.
I've had overexposure to sort of, I don't know what you would call it, people being against various logical scientific things.
Oh, yeah.
As it relates to global government. Though for me, when it's the overview effect and Carl Sagan's pale blue dot, it's like we're all the human race.
Yes.
So the idea of the fact that, countries and borders and Sykes-Picot and things, and the fact that we have property rights, they're all concepts. So the idea that we're not able to value our air in a way that can be transacted the same way everything else can be transacted, like dinosaur bones that we chew up to propel our cars, is crazy to me.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's just vested interests that don't want to change, locking us out from that sort of progression.
You'll love my piece. It's still very embryonic, but now that you're drawing me in, it is based on the idea that the current conception is that companies own the emissions that they emit, that they own them, and therefore they don't need to pay anyone for them. When they reduce their emissions, they're doing everyone a favour.
Yeah.
And I say, well, no national government owns the atmosphere because the atmosphere moves everywhere. Corporations don't own the atmosphere or the right to emit into the atmosphere. So no one owns the atmosphere. And if anyone owns the atmosphere, it's everybody.
Yeah.
And if everybody owns the atmosphere, why don't we just create a property right whereby everyone owns 1/7.5 billionth of the atmosphere and the right to emit into the atmosphere? That was the thought experiment that I've done. And I've actually tried to work out how you'd create a market around that, a voluntary market around that conception. So a company would say, instead of saying, I'm really good, I'm very virtuous, I'm going to reduce my reductions, what I think the company should be saying voluntarily is, I actually don't own the emissions that I emit. I now offer to buy my emissions from the owners, right? And we're going to create a market. So I'm going to go to poor countries and I'm going to buy the rights, their rights for emissions. It might be $10 a tonne.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be too much. And that actually distributes money from rich countries to poor countries and also creates an incentive, but also creates the fundamental property right that we need that goes beyond national governments in order to solve this problem. Eventually, just because of the nature of politics that I constantly ignore, I have a weakness to ignore politics. But ultimately, the brutal reality is national governments will have to endorse a system like that.
Yeah.
Saying, we see how it works. We see how 1,000 companies have voluntarily participated in this. We see that it works really well. We see how it can be scaled, but we see there's a limit unless we give it an endorsement.
Yeah.
So instead of the United Nations arguing and throwing things at each other, we create a system that actually works, that governments can then locally say, yes, that gets a gold star, and that's okay. We'll accept that. We'll enforce that. We'll create a regulatory environment that makes that mandatory, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a sort of a rough outline of what I'm calling the Universal Commons Atmosphere Trust. And it's got a lot of work ahead.
Yeah, I can see how for countries, I don't really believe in the first world, third world dichotomy anymore, but for countries that are more developing, how that's an amazing mechanism for them to bring wealth into their country, and through local investment, as people get smarter, as women become the economic powerhouse of the economy and have less children, and then people get more educated and basically move up the hierarchy of Maslow's needs, they don't pollute as much.
Correct. They start worrying. I mean, would you worry about global warming if you've got a child that's starving and you have to use a particular type of stove to make their next meal?
Yeah.
I mean, you're just not going to worry about it. If you're living in a first world country, you're over all that stuff.
Yeah.
And if you think you're more virtuous because you care about the environment, you're kidding yourself, which is why the system that says that those who use must pay those who don't use because a person in Eritrea uses a tenth of a tonne of carbon. We use 15 tonnes, 150 times more than Eritrean. So, but if we all own it, how does that work?
And if we all sit here and look at people who are burning cow dung and kerosene to heat their houses, being like, oh, they're the problem with the environment.
Correct.
While sitting in air conditioning in manufactured homes.
That produces a lot more carbon. As everything, it's complicated because maybe that dung burning is really a bad idea, but it's a problem we have to solve because they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
What are they going to do?
Yeah. That's the benefit of
they
privilege,
need the power.
Is that we have the perspective and the capacity to
affect
change.
We start worrying about the fact, in the model that I described, we, the wealthy, worry about the fact that the poor are leasing their carbon emission rights to companies for almost nothing. And we say, well, that's ridiculous. Suddenly it's captured in a market. The fact that they do not value it, it forces us to educate them. It forces us to make sure that they're not as poor as they are. All of those things become, the beauty of markets is they transmit information incredibly effectively. Suddenly you say, no one in Australia leased their carbon emission rights. Well, who would do it for $4.50 a year, because we get 4.5 tonnes each allocated. 7.5 billion by 4.5 tonnes is 40 billion, which is about what we emit. Why would you lease your rights to a corporation for, even if it was $10, for $45? If you're in Eritrea, no way you wouldn't do it. It's $45, feeds a family for several months, and suddenly that becomes a reality that we can actually see in the way the market operates because we've created property rights. Those who value the atmosphere less become identified in real terms by what they call in economics the revealed preferences, the prices that they're asking for the assets that they own, because they own 4.5 tonnes.
I know I was reading that it wouldn't, basically when people are left to their own devices, they wouldn't actually want to pay for their offset. But I know I booked a flight like 3 days ago and it had a button that said, do you want to offset 100% of your carbon price for like $1 compared to the $300 of the flights? And I was like, well, of course.
$1.
But I didn't, like $1.06. And I was like, oh, but I'd much rather that actually go to a developing nation.
That's interesting, because that's one of the problems that I've got, that the offset markets, in the thinking as I'm in my mind designing this market.
Yeah. It was Jetstar, and they were like,
the beauty of the offset markets is that people actually think, and sometimes justifiably, that the money that they spend is actually going to someone who's planted a tree. And that's true. And that feels good. It's actually good. The problem with that market is that the products are so heterogeneous and it's so impossible to know what you're getting for the money that you're spending, that it creates a reputational problem for that market and makes people like you who care skeptical. But if you are told instead that every company that emits is required to purchase from its owners the right to that emission, and that all that happens is money is transferred to a poor country, it's sort of a bit weird. You'd say, well, how does that affect the environment? The answer is, if you believe in markets, it does, because then it becomes a cost to that company. And the company will say, well, instead of we just sent $2 million to Eritrea last year, or India, but there's a piece of technology over there that will reduce that cost by $500,000, and it's only going to cost $1.5 million, we'll do it.
Yeah.
Whereas if they were never paying that, that $1.5 million investment had no return at all.
Yeah.
And that's the logic of markets.
Makes sense to me. Yeah. Thank you.
Pleasure.
A few questions I've just got to...
I've still got some questions. I thought I've answered everything by now.
No, actually, these are a few from Wendy Williams from Pro Bono Australia.
Go for it.
The role of philanthropy as social venture capital.
Okay. I completely agree. In our foundation, we focus on that enormously because it's the old fable of, give someone a fish and they'll eat for a day, give someone a fishing rod and they'll feed themselves. So a lot of philanthropy is the direct solving of problems. the most valuable philanthropy, in my opinion, is risky philanthropy, creating new projects, new ways of solving social problems, and then selling them to government, saying to government, look, we spent $1, we got $5 of social value, we've measured it. So that's social...
Selling impact mechanisms for government funding.
To government.
Yeah.
And I've got friends who do that. They talk to government before they start a project and say, we want you to watch this. Dialysis machines, for example, are a huge industry in the Northern Territory. But there's a sense that, for every dollar you spend on dialysis machines, you'll only have to spend 10 or 15 cents educating people, improving their diet. So if you start a program that does that in a community and then demonstrate the reduction in dialysis machines, which are a cost to the government may pick up your program. So you keep the government involved. They can't do stuff like that because governments are not allowed to take risks. When they make mistakes, they're castigated. Whereas a philanthropist makes a mistake, he loses his money. The theory didn't work. It actually cost $1.50 to reduce $1 of dialysis machines. Well, bad luck, I've burnt my money. So the answer is that's much better. And the most powerful thing that philanthropists can do is to influence policy through advocacy, which is the government hates that. The government hates when the philanthropists fund not-for-profits to lobby for changes in the rules. So that to me is the highest or most leveraged form of philanthropy. They're all valid.
The government hates that?
The government hates...
Sounds like quite a universal statement.
Well, particularly conservative governments, say in relation to climate change. So if I'm a philanthropist and I fund an environmental group that lobbies for change, the government doesn't like that and says they're not really a charity. You shouldn't be able to get a deduction for giving them that money because they're actually they're not charitable as defined under the Tax Act.
Right.
And when I was President of Philanthropy Australia, that was a really big issue. And we had to fight that really hard because the government wanted to change the rules so that organisations that spent more than a certain proportion of their money on advocacy, policy and advocacy, would be disqualified from receiving philanthropic funding.
Right.
And you can see there the power of policy and advocacy even within philanthropy, because that would have undermined the ability of philanthropists to create change. So we had to lobby as the forces of good, government not to do that, not to create that change.
Whereas if you're like the Minerals Council of Australia, you're not a charity per se, or if you're a think tank, you're...
Absolutely. You're not looking, you don't need the tax, incentives or the tax structures. Now, philanthropists simply cannot fund an organisation that doesn't have a certain status. And the government was threatening to remove that status from organisations that too much lobbying and advocacy.
Yeah, so don't make too much noise, just play amongst yourselves.
Because it's a very big threat to a government to believe that philanthropists can fund not-for-profits who then advocate for changes that are not consistent with what the government wants.
As opposed to just really successful business people who don't need a tax break because they're well-funded enough to do whatever they want.
But all things being equal, there's always someone that's going to do things, but all things being equal, if the regulation is changed, it makes it harder. It means less people do it.
Yeah.
So my answer is to that is absolutely, because just handing out money, giving people bowls of soup, helping the homeless, all very commendable. But maybe there needs to be a special tax regime for building shelters for homeless so that business people can do it profitably. Maybe that's a better thing to do with your money than to try to actually take a few homeless people off the street.
Yeah.
So it's leverage.
I've been very excited to see the recent Victorian government announcements about what I perceive as, in first time in my lifetime, really substantial top-line promotion of social investment, if you will. Yeah. It seems quite...
And making it again, this is the central thesis of what I'm trying to say. There's nothing wrong with profit as long as it's aligned with value, genuine value, so that if you want to create social housing and if you want business to do it, and business does things very effectively because they're always watching out for costs because they're trying to make profit. They're looking after their private interests. If you create the right regulatory environment, you will enable business to make a reasonable return out of doing social housing, and they will do it. don't make the rules such that they make extraordinarily high returns. Don't make the rules such that they can't do it at all because it's not economic, because the tenants can't afford to pay the sort of rents that are required to cover the cost of the building.
Yeah.
This is when governments create the environment for business people to make normal profits and reasonable profits, so that you have the private profit motive driving the efficiency of the economy, but not creating distortions and excessive inequality of wealth, etc., etc.
Yeah. So aligned policies around social good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How do we convince more boards to invest part of their corpus more ethically? And how do you see blended finance fitting into this?
How do we convince more boards of foundations?
I'd suggest so. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that I find it almost incomprehensible there would be any foundation that would not understand that they have, if they've got a corpus and they spend the income of that corpus to do social good, they have to look at how the corpus operates. For the corpus to own shares in Crown Casino, in order for the income of the corpus to deal with gambling problems, doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Right? So as a minimum, they have to start thinking about negative filters, perhaps. Way we operate, and it's the answer to the question is leadership, social change, politics, all the usual stuff. People start seeing other people doing things that works well. It's not as foreign. Like 10 years ago, this was really foreign.
Yeah.
Now it's not foreign anymore.
Yeah.
And more and more people
operates on the wall.
Exactly. So what we do is we see our corpus as actually being part of our arsenal, not just the income. So we try to invest. Well, the first thing you do is you do not invest your corpus in anything. You get a negative filter straight away. Arms, gambling, cigarettes, bang, 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 out. Right. Yeah. So you've already achieved something because you've starved those enterprises of capital, supposedly. But that's the same problem as the Hardin problem. You withdraw your capital, it actually improves the return, puts down the price of a cigarette company, which improves the return on investment because their profits are still the same. Somebody else invests in it.
Yeah.
Hardin's tragedy of the commons. I remove my cow, somebody else puts their cow into that cigarette company. Yeah. So it's complicated.
Especially with algorithmic trading. It's like the computers are always going to race in on the people who don't have qualms.
That's right.
So we're really just fighting the robots.
That's right.
Do you feel philanthropists should be engaging with impact investing? And if so, how and why?
Yeah, well, through their corpus.
Yeah.
They should be impact investors. Their corpus has got to have an intention of not only producing the returns they need to support the philanthropic giving that they do, but their investments must aim to produce at least no harm and, if possible, positive social and environmental outcomes.
Yeah. As we wrap this up, one of my speaking with Stephanie Gripney from the Impact Finance Center in Denver in Colorado, they're on a mission to create giving circles and basically activate more marketplaces for people who wanted to do good in the world. You're well recognized in the business community. Do you see yourself as a jumping off point for people who want to get involved with this? Should they flock to you and give you a call and be like, "Hey, Alan, I want to get on board." Well, what's your offer out there for
my offer?
People who want to do better.
Right now, I'm a seeker, not a sage. I'm trying to understand. I'm still in the learning phase. Now I've reached a point where I think I've learnt enough to give me license to be able to try to proselytize to some extent to people like myself, to say, I took this journey, it was really interesting, it was really enriching, it'll change the way I live. Why don't you listen to my story? So that's the first thing. And secondly, I was a business person and am still a business person for well over 40 years. And I have a constant, unquenchable desire to find a project that actually feels like a business project that advances the things I'm trying to do. Yeah. So how do you actually how do you stay away from the politics, which I've realised is so essential, and yet use the skills that I've got in creating enterprises and in creating projects to make the change that I want. And I don't have an answer to that. So at the moment, all I'm doing is talking to whoever wants to talk to me about my journey and how I've self-radicalised, if you like, in my late years, and understand that profit earned is not necessarily value created. And if business people understand that, that forces them to do two things. Firstly, to realise they shouldn't feel so smug and pleased with themselves, because some profits can be earned without value, and they have to examine that. And secondly, when profit and value are not aligned, they've got to understand that changes in regulations are not red tape, but actually society trying to make sure that the profit motive is aligned with value creation for society.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you very much for joining us today with Alan Schwartz from the Trawala Group. And my name is Philip Bateman. This has been the Smarter Impact Show, and I run the organization called Bravo Charlie. So if you're out there trying to make a difference in the world, digital systems, content production, and media is going to have a transformative effect for you and help you better engage your stakeholders. And I'd love to help you if you're on a mission to do a lot of good. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Philip. It was an absolute pleasure.
Let's talk concepts. Firstly, building for the second circle. I'm confident you're engaging and know your stuff. The problem arises when you walk out of a room and the person you've just met tries to convey your message. It doesn't have your nuance, expertise, or enthusiasm. Video does, and it ticks the main purpose of marketing, which is making it easy for people to sign off on trusting you. It's shareable, repeatable, and engaging, and we can build it for the second circle, which means your clients can easily pass on your message.